David Miller was the man everyone thought they knew, a devoted husband, a loving father, and a respected neighbor, yet behind that flawless image, he was hiding a dangerous secret with his girlfriend Rachel, a secret that would spiral into lies, betrayal, and ultimately, cold-blooded murder. David Miller was the kind of man people pointed to as an example of stability. To neighbors, he was the man who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and waved kindly at anyone who passed by. To co-workers, he was the dependable employee who never missed a deadline and always seemed calm under pressure. At home, he was the father who attended school plays, cheered at soccer games, and made sure to capture family moments with his camera. His wife, Emily, trusted him completely, and their 2 children adored the sense of safety he provided. Nothing about his daily life suggested darkness, yet beneath the routine and smiles, David was quietly weaving a web of deception that no one had suspected. The truth was that David had been living a double life for nearly a year. While he continued to present himself as a committed husband, he had met Rachel through a chance encounter at a business event. Rachel was vibrant, independent, and everything he felt was missing in his carefully structured world. What began as casual conversations soon grew into secret meetings, dinners in dimly lit restaurants, and weekend getaways disguised as work obligations. For David, the thrill of being desired by someone new was intoxicating. The more he gave in, the deeper he sank into a relationship that was built entirely on lies. Rachel had no idea just how much David was hiding. She believed his stories about a crumbling marriage, the kind where love had long since vanished, but obligations to family kept him trapped. She trusted his words when he promised that one day soon, they would no longer need to hide. For her, their love felt like destiny, something worth waiting for. For him, it was an escape from a life he had begun to resent, but also a dangerous secret that grew harder to control with every passing day. David knew that if Emily ever discovered the affair, the perfect image he had spent years constructing would collapse instantly. His friends would see him differently, his children would never forgive him, and his reputation would be permanently ruined. Still, he continued to balance both lives, convincing himself he could keep the world separate. But secrets have a way of unraveling. And David was underestimating just how fragile his careful lies truly were. What started as an exciting distraction was quickly becoming a ticking clock, and every second that passed brought him closer to a truth he could no longer contain. Rachel had grown tired of waiting. What once felt like a thrilling romance was now clouded by frustration and doubt. She had given David her heart, believing his promises that one day he would leave his marriage and choose her openly. Each time he postponed the moment, she told herself it was because of his children or because of complicated finances. But the excuses were wearing thin. She started pressing harder, asking him for timelines, for real signs that he was serious about their future. To Rachel, it was no longer enough to meet in hidden places and live in secrecy. She wanted a life with him, and she wasn't willing to remain in the shadows forever. David, however, was unraveling under the pressure. The more Rachel demanded, the more trapped he felt. He had built his identity around being a family man, and the thought of losing Emily and his children filled him with dread. He feared the shame of being exposed, the whispers of neighbors, the disappointment in his children's eyes. In public, he still played the role of the doting father, attending dinners and smiling at family gatherings. But behind closed doors, the mask was slipping. The constant calls and messages from Rachel, asking when he would make a decision, turned his secret into a burden he could no longer carry comfortably. Rachel wasn't bluffing when she hinted at revealing the truth. She knew about his routines, his job, even details of his family life he had shared during moments of intimacy. She was tired of being hidden, and she wanted Emily to know the truth. To her, it was a way of forcing the man she loved to finally commit. To David, it was a direct threat to everything he had built. He began to see Rachel not as the woman who had once made him feel alive, but as someone capable of tearing his entire life apart. The tension grew with every meeting. David would smile and reassure her, but in his mind, darker thoughts began to take shape. He fantasized about solutions, about ways to silence the problem before it destroyed him. At first, it was only fleeting, an image of escape or disappearance, but soon those thoughts became more deliberate. Each time Rachel pressed for an answer, his fear deepened, and fear slowly turned into desperation. By the time she gave him an ultimatum, David had already convinced himself that he had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. The night David chose to act was cloaked in stillness, the kind of evening where the world felt hushed, as though holding its breath. He told Emily he had to stay late at work to finish a project, a lie that rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. Rachel, meanwhile, was elated when he suggested they meet at a small cabin he claimed belonged to a friend. To her, it seemed like progress, perhaps a private retreat where they could talk openly about the future she had been waiting for. She arrived with cautious optimism. Unaware of the storm, David had already set in motion. The cabin sat isolated at the edge of the woods, its faded wood panels barely visible in the dim light. Inside, the air was cold and stale, filled with the creaks of an old structure that hadn't been used in months. Rachel thought little of the atmosphere. Her attention was focused on David, on the possibility that this night might finally bring her the commitment she longed for. She didn't notice the nervous way he avoided her eyes, or how rigidly he held his posture. David wasn't there to talk about the future. He had come with a darker resolve, one born out of fear and desperation. As Rachel pressed him again about leaving Emily, his composure fractured. The pressure that had been building inside him for months finally erupted. His mind raced with visions of his family discovering the affair, of neighbors whispering, of his children looking at him with shame. In that blur of panic and fury, he lashed out. The act was sudden, violent, and final. The life of the woman who had once been his escape was extinguished in a matter of moments. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by David's ragged breathing. When it was over, reality hit him like a wave. The weight of what he had done settled on his shoulders, heavier than any lie he had ever told. He looked at Rachel's still form and realized there was no undoing what had just occurred. The affair that had once seemed thrilling had now spiraled into a crime that bound him forever to the secret he thought he was escaping. Standing in that dim, lonely cabin, David knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the carefully constructed image of his perfect life would soon begin to crumble. David moved quickly, his mind racing with frantic calculations as he tried to erase the evidence of what had happened. He wiped down surfaces with shaking hands, scrubbing until his knuckles burned, convinced that every trace of him had to disappear. He dragged Rachel's body into the corner of the cabin and covered it clumsily with an old tarp he found inside. To him, it felt like enough to buy time. He gathered her purse, phone, and keys, stuffing them into a bag he planned to dispose of far from the scene. Every movement was mechanical, driven by the belief that if he stayed focused, he could outsmart the police. But even as he worked, mistakes were already forming. Tiny blood stains lingered in cracks of the floorboards, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but obvious to forensic investigators. Fibers from his clothing clung to Rachel's jacket. His phone, though tucked back into his pocket, had silently tracked his location, marking his presence at the cabin with precision. David told himself he was being thorough, yet the invisible trail was already against him. By the time he left, the cabin appeared abandoned, its silence swallowing the violent act. He drove home with a steady expression, rehearsing excuses in his mind in case anyone asked about his evening. Emily greeted him with a smile when he returned, never suspecting that her husband had blood on his conscience. For a moment, he felt relief, convinced he had pulled it off. But beneath that calm exterior, paranoia began to grow. He replayed every detail, questioning whether he had overlooked something. Each time his phone buzzed, his chest tightened, half expecting it to be the police. The discovery of Rachel's disappearance came quickly. Her coworkers noticed she never returned home and reported her missing. Her abandoned car was soon found parked near the cabin, raising immediate suspicion. When investigators entered the property, they noticed faint signs of attempted cleaning. To them, it was not a forgotten space, but a potential crime scene. What David had tried to erase was slowly pieced back together by experts trained to read even the smallest clues. While he went about his daily life pretending nothing had happened, detectives were already following a trail that pointed directly to him. His false confidence would not last long because every carefully constructed lie was now colliding with a reality he could no longer control. The investigation closed in faster than David could have imagined. Detectives pieced together the puzzle with methodical precision, starting with Rachel's phone records. Her last calls and messages were all to David, filled with hopeful words about the night they were supposed to spend together. Investigators compared this to David's timeline, and the cracks in his alibi immediately began to show. His claims of working late were contradicted by security footage from his office parking lot, which showed his car leaving hours earlier. What he thought were clever lies now appeared flimsy against hard evidence. The most damning proof came from technology he had underestimated. His phone location data placed him near the cabin at the exact time Rachel disappeared. Even attempts to delete messages between them were futile, as investigators recovered them through backups. Alongside this, the discovery of a bank account Rachel had in her name, funded by regular deposits from David, demonstrated how deeply invested he had been in the affair. What he had once hidden in shadows was now glaringly obvious under the scrutiny of law enforcement. As detectives built their case, David's world began collapsing. His wife Emily was stunned when police arrived at their home, armed with a warrant. The neighbors who had once admired him now whispered in disbelief as officers led him away in handcuffs. His children watched their father's image shatter before their eyes, unable to comprehend how the man they trusted had been living such a dark lie. For Emily, the betrayal cut deeper than the crime itself. She had believed in his loyalty, never once suspecting the double life that had unraveled their family in an instant. In the courtroom, the picture of David as a respected husband and father was replaced with the chilling reality of a man consumed by lies and fear. Prosecutors laid out the evidence in stark detail, showing how desperation had turned into violence, and how arrogance led him to believe he could cover it up. The jury saw through his carefully rehearsed explanations, finding him guilty of murder. His sentence sealed his fate, leaving him to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The story of David Miller became a grim reminder that beneath even the most ordinary lives, secrets can fester until they destroy everything. What began as a hidden romance ended in tragedy, exposing how far someone will go when trapped between the life they built and the lies they chose to protect.